The science of nutrigenomics is a branch of nutrition that deals with the interface between nutrition and our genetic makeup, with the ultimate goal of trying to see if we can use genetics to understand why some people respond differently from others to the same foods, beverages, and supplements that they consume. We've known for a long time that the current one size fits all recommendations are inefficient and often ineffective in some people. And we've also learned that our individual genetic differences can explain some of those inconsistencies. And so the field of nutrigenomics or nutritional genomics or even precision nutrition, all really different terms that effectively say the same thing. How can we provide more accurate, more reliable, more precise recommendations to an individual to help them meet their health and wellness goals?
Welcome to the Wellness That Fits podcast, where we help busy moms eat well, restore energy, and clear brain fog without sacrificing family time or your sanity. I'm Cassie Groeschl, registered dietitian and mom of 3. I believe wellness should fit your real life, not the other way around. If you're tired of complicated wellness trends and want simple, sustainable strategies for meal prep, holistic nutrition, and time-saving routines, you're in the right place. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Wellness That Fits podcast. Today, I am so excited to bring on Dr. Ahmed El-Sohemy. He is a professor and associate chair at the University of Toronto and held a Canada Research Chair in Nutrigenomics. He is also the founder of Nutrigenomix, Inc. and serves as Chief Science Officer. Dr. El-Sohemy obtained his PhD from the University of Toronto and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard. He has published over 200 peer-reviewed publications and has given more than 400 invited talks around the world on precision nutrition. Dr. El-Sohemy is the recipient of several awards for research excellence by the Canadian Nutrition Society, the American College of Nutrition, and the American Nutrition Association. So we have a wealth of knowledge in Dr. El-Sohemy, and I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and hello, everyone.
So, Dr. El-Sohemy, could you maybe just give us a general overview of what nutrigenomics actually is and what it can tell us?
Sure. Well, the science of nutrigenomics, spelled ICS, which is distinct from the company Nutrigenomics, that's spelled with an IX, the science is a branch of nutrition that deals with the interface between nutrition and our genetic makeup, with the ultimate goal of trying to see if we can use genetics to understand why some people respond differently from others to the same foods, beverages, and supplements that they consume. We've known for a long time that the current, one size fits all recommendations are inefficient and often ineffective in some people. And we've also learned that our individual genetic differences can explain some of those inconsistencies. And so the field of nutrigenomics or nutritional genomics or even precision nutrition, all really different terms that effectively say the same thing, right? How can we provide more accurate, more reliable, more precise recommendations to an individual to help them meet their health and wellness goals?
Yeah, I love that. I think this is so important. It's such a emerging area of research. I mean, you've been in it for a while, but I know when I was in school for dietetics, we only had touched the surface of this. This was like over a decade ago. And so it's interesting seeing a lot more research coming out. And so it's, again, I just want to reiterate the fact that I feel like a few decades ago, it was very much this feeling that our genetics played, I mean, of course, genetics play a huge role, but it was almost like lifestyle factors didn't play as much of a role. And now we're learning more that if we can work those two together, we can have the best outcome. And so what I love about your company, Nutrigenomix, is you have these 3 different genetic tests that you can run. So there's the health test, the sport test, and the fertility test. Can you explain what each of those tests how they are set apart from one another and what they tell us?
Sure. Well, so moving to the company Nutrigenomics, which started off as a University of Toronto startup almost 14 years ago now, but now operates independently, and it provides genetic testing for nutrition professionals like registered dietitians. So it's not direct to consumer. And the current test panel consists of 70 genetic markers. And this is where the science is most robust. So I mentioned 70. The number itself doesn't really matter. More is not better by any means. You have to make sure that you're looking at reliable, valid clinical information. And so we do have a health format, a sport format, and a fertility format. And they all look at the same genetic markers, except the wording and the recommendations speak to a different end user. So if you're an athlete and your main interest is in optimizing performance and improving or minimizing recovery post exercise, then the recommendations are going to speak in that context. So, like vitamin C, for example, is required for collagen synthesis. And again, after exercise, you want to make sure that you also want to minimize risk of soft tissue injury. At the same time, in the health report, vitamin C is discussed in the context of heart health. And in the fertility report, vitamin C is discussed in the context of the likelihood of conception. So if you have a gene that makes you inefficient at utilizing vitamin C and you need a little bit more, whether it's for heart health, whether it's for um, recovery after exercise, or whether it's because you're trying to conceive, you need a little bit more vitamin C. And so the report format just speaks to what that end user's primary interests are.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, same genes being looked at, just different end results being tweaked based on that specific season they're in and that. Okay. So I work with a lot of high performing women who are experiencing burnout fatigue, oftentimes in their 30s and 40s, and maybe not quite hitting perimenopause. Some of them are, but a common theme is brain fog and lower stress tolerance, probably some anxiety or maybe even depression creeping in. So I'm wondering what the battery of genes that you're looking at, what maybe those would have to do with these midlife women in terms of women's health? What can that tell us?
Yeah, so I mean, when I hear a lot of these symptoms, some of them remind me of conditions like gluten intolerance, right? Especially when you talk about brain fog. And we published a paper around 8 years ago in the British Medical Journal showing that 90% of cases of celiac disease, which is the most severe form of gluten intolerance, are undiagnosed. So, despite the widespread availability of gluten-free foods, 90% of those who have celiac disease are walking around and don't know it. And the reason is, I think, partly because celiac disease manifests in different forms. There's the kind of the classic GI issues that occur in children, coupled with failure to thrive, and they're often referred to a gastroenterologist who immediately orders a celiac test. But then there's this second wave that is not related to GI symptoms as much as other types of symptoms, like decreased bone mass, anemia, and those kinds of things then trigger other kinds of symptoms, brain fog. Patchy skin, joint pains. And these are things, again, you go to a rheumatologist and say, oh, I got joint pains. They're not going to test for celiac disease. It's just not usually what they do. And so we've come across actually a number of cases of individuals who have done our test and found that they have the highest risk for celiac disease. And then they go and get the antibody testing, and sure enough, it's confirmed, followed by a biopsy, of course, that they ended up having celiac disease. And they didn't even think about that. They decided to do the test because of other ideas and health conditions, and then found out that gluten was a major source of the brain fog and in some instances seizures. So the report looks at some of those food intolerances, and it also looks at some of the micronutrients that feed and fuel every cell of the body, whether it's a muscle cell, a brain cell, a heart cell. So if you're not fueling your body properly based on your genetics, then those organ systems are not going to function optimally. So whether they're skin cells, again, whether they're muscle cells or heart cells, you need to make sure that your nutritional requirements, that you're getting adequate intakes of the different kinds of nutrients. So our panel tests for about a dozen different micronutrients and the likelihood of having a deficiency. It doesn't test for deficiency. It's not a diagnostic, but it tells you genetically you are not efficient at metabolizing vitamin D. So you might need a vitamin D supplement, or you need to consume more vitamin D from various dietary sources. So it really helps to shine a light on different aspects of your diet that you just didn't know that you needed to pay attention to. And that's the value of this kind of genetic test, right? You don't know what you don't know, right? And some people that got this test are like, oh, I might have a problem with gluten. I had no idea. I never even thought of that. And then, sure enough, they go through the various tests, and it confirms that they do, in fact, have a severe gluten.
Yeah, and I thank you for sharing that part about the gluten because I do think it's important to take a look at some of those food sensitivities. Also, just the micronutrients and some of the vitamins and minerals just really interest me because there's so much science around those micronutrient deficiencies and how it impacts the rest of your body, even down to the cellular level. And so, with this genetic testing, it's almost like a precursor, right? Like you said, it's giving you your variant and your risk level to then be like, okay, if you are um, at risk of maybe not metabolizing vitamin D very well, then you could at that point go and get your vitamin D levels tested. So I just wanted to say that again in case anybody missed it, because I think that's an important distinction that you made. And so I'm just taking a look at a sample report that you have online here, and I see so you're taking a look at a gene for vitamin D and, taking a look at somebody's variant, and then the risk might be elevated in the sample report. And so then you give recommendations, which I think is really nice. So in this example online, it's like consume 1,000 IUs of vitamin D daily. And so that's kind of like the progression of what you'll see for each of those micronutrients and some other ones. As I look at this report, can you talk a little bit about folate and the MTHFR gene and any variants, and what does it mean for some people?
Sure, there's been a lot of interest over the years in the MTHFR gene, which is a major regulator of folate metabolism. Folate, of course, is an essential micronutrient that's involved in all kinds of metabolic and physiological processes in the body. Um, and some people have, so this MTHFR gene codes for an enzyme, and the enzyme is involved in the metabolism of folate. And some people have decreased enzyme activity. So if they have the T version of that gene as opposed to the C version, that diminishes the activity of that enzyme. And so you're not recycling the folate as efficiently. And so those individuals need to consume more folate to overcome this metabolic inefficiency that's coded in their DNA, right? It's just, the luck of the draw that we inherit from our parents. And as you know, we inherit one copy of a gene from our mother and one from our father. And so if both of our parents gave us the T version of that, then we would have even less enzyme activity. This is what we call a homozygote, someone who has two copies of that T allele or the T version of that gene. So one copy, you have about 60% enzyme activity. Two copies, you have only 30% enzyme activity. So as you can imagine, you need even more to compensate for that metabolic inefficiency. Now, we've actually studied this gene in many contexts. One of my former PhD students, her project looked at micronutrients and premenstrual symptoms. So there's a variety of symptoms that over 90% of menstruating women experience during the premenstrual stage, and those could be physical, like cramps or headaches, or they can be psychological, like mood swings, anxiety, depression. And what we found was that women who have that TT version of the MTHFR gene have a significantly higher risk of premenstrual depression. So not just generalized depression, although other studies have shown that, but specifically depression during the premenstrual phase. What was fascinating, though, was that this effect was only observed in women who had low folate intake in their diet. So when you looked at women who had higher intake of folate, that gene had absolutely no impact on premenstrual depression, which tells us a few things. One is our genes are not our destiny, right? There are certain things that we can do to overcome certain genetic inefficiencies, if you will, that we may have inherited. And the second is that it shows that diet does have a big effect on our mood and our behavior. And this is a well-recognized field of investigation, nutritional psychiatry. And there's a lot of research now looking at how diet affects anxiety, mood swings, depression, and other psychological conditions.
I love it. I'm obsessed with nutrition psychology and psychiatry. Is it like you said, I don't think people understand the impact that diet has. For example, about 25% of women in the last year have experienced anxiety, maybe not general anxiety disorder, but some sort of maybe panic attacks or anxiety. And that's a good amount of people. And I think that it's important to understand that we can impact this. I mean, again, from the beginning, when I was saying a lot of people think your genetics, it's already determined. And I think it's promising and hopeful to think that what we eat and lifestyle factors can really impact that. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I think, like you said, the MTHFR variant is becoming a lot more talked about. And so I wanted to clear up some of that. And thanks for sharing that. I want to ask one more about these micronutrients, the iron. So you have the iron overload, but then also low iron status. This is very interesting to me because my whole family is pretty much iron deficient. And I always wonder, it must be the fact that we just can't absorb iron very well. And we have to really be cognizant of the iron that we're eating in our diet. And so, can you talk a little bit more about this? Because also, it's not just for myself, but also, when you have low iron, the fatigue, a lot of women, and especially menstruating women who are losing blood and losing the red blood cells and everything. So, can you talk a little bit more about that gene variant, what it might tell us, and what we might do afterward with that information?
Absolutely. So there are a few genes that impact iron metabolism. As you noted, iron deficiency anemia is actually, I think, the most prevalent micronutrient deficiency in the world. And in addition to fatigue and other kinds of symptoms like that, it's associated with a lot of other adverse health outcomes because iron is such a critical mineral. Um, and so there are about three genes that we test for that predict low iron status. And so for individuals, men or women who have those genetic variants, they need to make sure they're consuming adequate amounts of iron. So whatever they're consuming now, um, again, it shines a light on it. It says, okay, have you been tested? Have you had your blood tested, right? The transferrin or ferritin, the biomarkers that you would get when, during your annual physical. And if those levels are suboptimal, that means you need to get more iron in your diet to overcome that. The other side of the coin is there are, and this is much less common, the condition called iron overload or hemochromatosis, which is a condition that's caused by a different gene, the HFE gene. And so even though that's less common and it's rare, we have to test for it because you don't want someone who, there is it's possible that a person has the genetics for low iron, but they also have this iron overload gene, which supersedes the effects of those low iron genes because this one is just more powerful. It's more penetrant, as we describe it in genetics. And so if an individual has that, the iron overload version of that gene, you want to make sure that they're actually mindful of not getting too much iron. But most people actually know if they have it, because if they've ever had any blood work, it would show that they have too much iron, and that can cause liver damage and other kinds of adverse effects. Now, that impacts men more so than women for obvious reasons, because women who are menstruating lose blood every month. And so, even though they might have the iron overload gene, it's not actually, it never actually builds up to toxic levels, because they're always, losing some blood once a month. And we actually showed in a study that we published in the Journal of Nutrition that women who have the gene that predicts iron overload, high iron, they actually have a lower risk or lower likelihood of premenstrual fatigue. And that might seem so obvious and it's common sense, but no one had ever shown this before. And that to us, again, emphasizes the importance of getting enough iron. So even though we're using genetics to predict an outcome like premenstrual fatigue, um, what is the actionable piece here? And the actionable piece is that all women basically need to ensure that they're having adequate amounts of iron, and the upper end of normal is what's likely to um, help alleviate some of those symptoms like premenstrual fatigue and probably fatigue in general. Right? I mean, we ask in our questionnaire specifically about premenstrual fatigue, but women who experience that oftentimes experience fatigue throughout the cycle. And so that's why, again, we're talking about one particular micronutrient, iron, and some people might say, oh, how can it have such a big effect on, just my energy level? But it absolutely does. And that's just our, physiology and biology, because it transports oxygen, or helps at least in terms of hemoglobin. And if you're not getting enough oxygen to tissues, you're just not going to be able to function or perform.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. And you had said a couple things. So one of them is that make sure that you're getting your iron level tested in your annual physical. And I just wanted to say that I don't know if this is standard everywhere, but I know for my annual physical, I have to ask for those additional, like the transferrin and the other iron ones. So outside of just hemoglobin, which it could be a marker, and then you have to further get it tested. And so I just wanted to throw that out there for any women who that's not standard care. And so if you do have low hemoglobin, usually your doctor might order that other test, but it's something maybe to ask for. Um, and then you had mentioned about getting enough iron. And so something that I noticed in the health samples that a client or whatever would get back is usually the recommendations are saying like meet the RDA for iron or ensure that you're getting the adequate intake. Is there ever a time where somebody you might see it like a variant where they might have to go outside of that RDA, or does that not really happen?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the thing about the evidence, so when you look at how RDAs are set, right? When you look at the requirements of any nutrient in a population, it's bell shaped. So usually for micronutrients, we set the requirement at the upper end of that curve, but there's still a few people that are beyond that we're not quite, but it's meant to capture about 97% of the population's requirements. So the question is, am I at this end of the spectrum or am I at that end of the spectrum? And there are, of course, some rare cases that are outside of that spectrum, right? The outliers, at extreme ends. And those kinds of cases are usually quite rare. But even if you're at the kind of upper end of the normal range, um, the current recommendations are still what is prudent in terms of making those recommendations. Now, the idea is, a lot of people aren't even close to meeting that. So just getting them to actually follow those recommendations really helps to move the needle. And or at least my recommendation is that, once you start doing that and you do it for, let's say, several months, then try to get retested again to see if you were actually able um, to optimize those biomarkers, whether it's the transferrin or the ferritin. And as you rightly pointed out, those are not always routinely tested, and sometimes you have to advocate for yourself. And when I get my annual physical, I ask my doctor to also test for 25 hydroxyvitamin D and ascorbic acid. And he's great about it. He's like, sure, and he'll add it to the list. And B12 too is another one. Um, so eh, again, you do have to advocate for your health in terms of making sure that these things are being monitored, because even in the best case scenario, sometimes you will do what you think is right, and for various reasons, whether there's something else in your diet that might be inhibiting absorption of a particular micronutrient. When it comes to iron, as you know, there are the heme and non-heme sources, basically animal sources that are more bioavailable, and then there's the plant-based sources. So some people who are vegans or vegetarians, they know that certain foods are rich in iron, but a lot of that is not as readily absorbable. And so even on paper, they might be meeting their numbers. Physiologically, it's just not being as utilized. And so we know that the plant-based sources absorption can be facilitated with ascorbic acid. And that's why recommendations for taking certain supplements, iron supplements, are to take it with orange juice, because that enhances absorption. So we do actually have a fourth report in addition to the health, sport, and fertility, and that's the plant-based report. And that's very similar to the health report, except it's intended for those who are vegans or vegetarians. Now, their genetics is not different, but their food choices are, right? And so if someone has the gene for low iron, you're not going to recommend that they eat a steak or a piece of chicken, right? Because they're just not going to do that. And so we just wanted to respect people's choices. We're not promoting a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, even though we know there's good science showing some health benefits just by increasing your plant consumption. You don't have to be a full vegan or full vegetarian. And so we want to be respectful of those choices and give people plant-based options for meeting their iron intake or their vitamin D intake or B12, which is even more difficult to get through a vegan diet.
Yeah, thank you. I think this actually brings up a really good point of my next question, which is if you could bring us through the process of so somebody orders a test, you had mentioned you have to do it through like a dietitian or one of the practitioners involved in nutrigenomics. And then, what they do, what you collect, and then interpretation of results, I think is very important. One of the most important things, obviously, is what you do with this information. And so, can you walk us through that process from start to finish to interpretation of results and who does it?
So you, as a registered dietitian, are qualified to offer this test to your clients. So let's say one of your patients contacts you and says, "You know what? I heard about this test. I'd like to get it done." What you would do as the practitioner is you would log into your Nutrigenomics account, and if you're seeing that client in person, you would have already ordered a supply of kits. If you're seeing them remotely, then you would just enter their address and say, ship a kit to my client here in Milwaukee or Colorado or wherever. They will receive a cheek swab and with instructions on how to collect their DNA. And it's a non-invasive test. You just scrape the inside of both cheeks for about 10 or 15 seconds, put it in the postage paid return envelope, drop it in a mailbox, and a couple of weeks later, you as the practitioner will receive a notification saying your client Jane's report is now ready. And so it's up to you to now send that report electronically to your client. We don't deal with your clients that we call end users. We only deal with practitioners. So the only time we deal with them is if you want us to ship them a kit. And so we will do that. And then the kit comes with just a barcode. So when they return it, they don't have to write their name. There's no requisition. They don't enter their date of birth or any identifying information. So we go to extreme lengths to ensure the anonymity of that sample. So once it reaches our lab, our our lab technicians only see a sample with a barcode. They have no idea who it belongs to. Now, some people put their return address on the envelope, and that's okay, but that's immediately discarded. And then the sample is because even if it's an address, you don't know who lives at that address, and
Mhm.
and there's just maybe their initials. But again, that's discarded, and then the sample is processed, and then based on that barcode, you as the practitioner who entered it, um, you know who that belongs to because you entered it into your account. And so once that report is ready, it'll say, you know, you look at it, you open it, and you'll say, "Oh, this is for Jane." And so I'm going to send this. You have a link. You send that report to Jane, and then you meet with Jane, and then you review her results. Most people are able to understand the report. It's fairly consumer friendly. Some need a little bit more hand holding and guidance, and this is where again a dietitian would use his or her expertise to communicate what needs to be done in terms of an action plan. So if you have a client, you go through the micronutrients and say, okay, here are the ones that you need to focus on: folate, choline, B12, vitamin D. And your client might say, hey, choline, what is that? I've never even heard of it. And you say, okay, well, turn to page 17 and you'll learn all about choline and the kinds of foods that are rich sources of choline. And here's why it's important for brain health, muscle function, all of those different things. And you can some clients say, okay, that's great. Now, can you create a meal plan for me? And so we do have those kinds of resources for dietitians that can help create a DNA-based meal plan, or the dietitian might, have her own software and say, okay, I'll create a meal plan that is generally low in sodium because you need to limit your sodium intake, but it's high in folate and protein and whole grains, let's say, because that's what your genetic report suggests that you need a little bit more of.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that this is going through a clinician, somebody who's qualified to take a look at those results and interpret them, because I think that we are, best qualified and suited to be able to interpret those results and pick the lowest hanging fruit, right? Like, okay, it's your folate. We want to focus on that first versus iron, so on and so forth. So I work with very intuitive, smart women, and they can read the results, but at the same time, a lot of the women are very overwhelmed and they're just like, okay, another thing I have to do. Right. And so that's the importance of ensuring you're working with a clinician or dietitian to help you interpret those results and kind of set a plan in place. And, I have the meal plan software as well. And it's very easy for us to do that. And especially picking out certain vitamins and minerals and again very robust software that I have that can help us identify specific nutrients. So yeah, I love that. um if you I one more question, just because I love brain health. I'm all about brain health and brain optimization. Is there any thoughts that you had on specific genes or variants that maybe could help us understand a little bit more about our optimal brain function and performance?
Absolutely. And I think, the short answer is all of the genes involved in micronutrient metabolism, because again, they're all essential nutrients for the functioning of a cell. And again, if we're talking about a brain cell, you need enough vitamin E, A, B, C, D, all of those micronutrients. Some have gotten a bit more attention than others, like choline or folate. But again, you don't want to have a weak link, right? So you can have optimal and awesome levels of vitamin D and folate and choline, but if you're deficient in C and B12 or anything else, that's not going to be enough. And so um, again, this is why that's my favorite part of that report, because again, it's not knowing what you don't know. Um, Now there are other aspects of the diet and certain types of food intolerances that can contribute to less than optimal brain health, and I used gluten as one of those examples. Um, so yeah, I guess the report itself, just the entire report. We've had some practitioners say, "Oh, well, can I just get the weight management section of the report because my client's only interested in losing weight, or can I just get the food intolerance because they suspect that they have some food intolerance issues." Um, again, you don't know what you don't know. And maybe the micronutrients is what you really need to be focusing on. So you really need that whole comprehensive 70 gene report to get a complete picture of where those genetic vulnerabilities are. Now, as the science evolves and grows, we keep adding to that. When we first started about 14 years ago, we had 7 genetic markers. And then we expanded that to 13 and then 45 and now 70. We now do have some specialized reports that are offered as add-ons, like histamine intolerance. And again, that's an area that, histamine is produced in the body, but it's also consumed in various kinds of foods. And so there are these high histamine foods that can trigger certain kinds of symptoms in some individuals. And if you know that you have this genetic vulnerability, then you need to look at some of these high histamine containing foods, certain kinds of cheeses, canned fish, red wine, to say, okay, maybe I need to limit some of those and perhaps some of these symptoms might go away. They might not. And again, we're not claiming that this is going to solve everything, but it will suggest that there are these areas of your diet and areas of your genetics that you might want to focus on. And lastly, we'll soon be launching a test for ApoE. And ApoE is a very well-studied gene, especially for in terms of risk of early onset Alzheimer's disease, but also cardiovascular disease. And we were asked by a number of practitioners many years ago, especially some physicians, to test for this over 10 or 15 years ago. And we decided not to at the time because there was little evidence that there's anything you can do. But since then, there have been a number of studies, including well-designed, randomized controlled clinical trials, showing that there are specific actions that you can take to mitigate that increased risk. So that's going to be kind of like a brain health and heart health report that will have about 10 lifestyle recommendations. Anything from vitamin D to omega-3 fats to the Mediterranean diet to even sleep. And so there's a lot of things that individuals can do to greatly reduce that risk of early Alzheimer's by diet and lifestyle.
Yeah, I actually just read a stat in the Lancet in 2024, and it was showing that about 45% of the cases of Alzheimer's or dementia can be reduced or delayed through diet and lifestyle factors. So I think it just gives us a lot of hope in that it's not our ultimate destiny and that we can impact that through our food choices and our lifestyle choices. So very exciting that you're adding those tests histamine as well. I didn't realize that one. That one's a very interesting to me. So, and I know a lot of other people too have either allergies or they want to understand maybe leaky gut a little bit more. And I know that histamine plays a huge role in that. So that's very exciting stuff. Um, Last question. I kind of forgot that you had this test, but I think it's so interesting. And I know our listeners are going to want to hear about the exercise and motivation. Tell us about that.
Sure, we have a kind of a sub panel within that 70 gene report on exercise and physical fitness, and it tells you again, I hate to say it's my favorite part of the report. Every part of it I love because otherwise we wouldn't have developed it. But it's really an interesting area of research for me. So I've had a number of grad students who have worked on um, sport nutrigenomics. So understanding how diet and genetics impact athletic performance. We also know that our genes influence um, our preference and the reinforcing effect of exercise. So you mentioned exercise motivation. Just the desire to engage in physical activity. There is a gene that contributes to that. Now, you might ask yourself, well, do I want to know that? And what if it says I don't have a desire to work out? Does that mean that I shouldn't? No, it just means that, hey, this helps you understand why it might be a little bit more challenging for you. So don't beat yourself over the head. Once you start getting into that routine, it will become easier. Some people are just quicker to pick up any kind of exercise regimen, feel, jacked and invigorated and say, all right, I can't wait to the next class. Others, they're like, well, you'll have to drag me to the gym the next time. But, it's okay because, again, habits sometimes take longer to form. And for some people, it just takes a little bit longer. And to know that maybe our genes are influencing that, I think is empowering. There's a whole section on eating behaviors. We made a discovery almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, actually, in 2008, identifying the so-called sweet tooth gene, showing that some people who have a particular version of this gene consume more sugar on a daily basis because it takes them longer to get that satiating signal and to get that dopamine hit to say, okay, I feel good now, and now it's time to stop. Others, they just consume more sugar before they get that same signal. So knowing that you have that gene is empowering because you can say, okay, this is now my gene talking to me. I've had a little piece of chocolate. I should stop here. The signal might be a little bit delayed. I don't need to scarf down the rest of the chocolate bar to get that signal. I just need to be a little bit more patient. So again, knowledge is power, and I think understanding some of those genetic determinants of our behaviors can just help us better understand ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it helps for the dietitian to help the client in planning processes. And like if we know that a client has a big sweet tooth, right? Like we're going to ensure that we have high fiber, high protein breakfasts set out, ready to go. If they're having issues with motivation and exercise, like how do we prioritize it? You know what I mean? It's just ways that we can touch base with the client as the first line, right? Like these are our first things we want to touch on to set them up for success for the rest of the nutrition strategies. So I think it's really important and very interesting that there's a gene on that. So thank you for sharing that. Anything else you want to share? I guess maybe one last tidbit or nugget that you want to leave with my listeners.
Well, one question that sometimes I get when I present some of our work, at a conference, and someone will say, "Well, who's a good candidate for this kind of genetic test?" And my answer is, if you eat and drink and you care about your health, you're a good candidate, right? You don't have to have been diagnosed with prediabetes or hypertension or any kind of health ailment. Now, usually those people are a little bit more motivated to seek out possible solutions. But you don't have to wait until your cholesterol levels have crept up or your high blood pressure has gone up or that your energy levels have gone down. Um, it's good to know today now, how can I eat most efficiently to optimize my cellular health and just align my diet with my genetics so that I don't start developing hypertension, my energy levels don't begin to decline rapidly. I can stay more, sharper for a longer period of time. So, again, I think it's something that everyone can benefit from. And yeah, those are my final words.
Yeah, I think it's a great precursor, right, to a lot of other things. And it can set the stage for specific labs that you might want to get. And even if somebody doesn't want to go that route, I know a lot of people are big into biohacking and trying to get all the data they can, which it's certainly impactful to see what your genes show. But I think it just provides a good first step, right, for understanding if further testing should be done. And also just to get a feel for yourself. I think people are very interested in learning more about their genes and anything they can impact, honestly, down the road, anything that through diet or lifestyle they have the ability to change. So I think it's really important work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Thank you for the work that you're doing, the research that you're doing. And yeah, and can you tell us where people might be able to reach you if they wanna learn more information?
Sure. Just very quickly though, I do want to balance that statement that I made that, that everyone's a good candidate for it. I also want to say that not everyone is necessarily going to find a solution for what might ail them through this, right? You don't want to make any claims like that this is going to treat, prevent, or cure any kind of health condition. And it's important, of course, for people to speak to their health professional to discuss any existing condition that they might have. We have heard from people who have had the test, of course, say, oh, this did wonders for me, but everyone is different. And it doesn't mean that everyone is going to, again, improve their health, whatever condition might ail them today. But again, knowledge is power. And I think that there's always something that individuals can benefit from learning about their genetics, whether it's actually fixing a particular problem that they are dealing with or not. There is always some kind of benefit. Um, so in terms of learning more about the company Nutrigenomics, which is spelled IX at the end, Nutrigenomics, and go to the website, nutrigenomics.com. There's a link there for anyone who is a healthcare professional who might be listening to your podcast. And if they want to register and learn and get our free training, because we do, even though, again, a registered dietitian, um, you don't need to be a geneticist to understand how to tell people to change their diet. So the test is very self-explanatory, but the nutrition professional uses their skills to help people meet those dietary requirements. And so someone such as yourself, as again a dietitian, you might want to offer it to your clients, for clients who might be listening in a different part of the country and have another healthcare professional. They can just come to the website, send an email to info@nutrigenomics.com and say, I'm interested in getting this test. Can you connect me with a dietitian in my city, as an example, to get this test, or if they have any questions about it, they can contact the company that way.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah. And I'm very interested in it. Very robust website that you have and tools for practitioners. So if anybody also who's listening does want to find a practitioner to work with, I'm absolutely open to working with you and helping you set up this test. And can I ask you one more question? Because I kind of forgot. And it's like for me, I really wanted to ask this. The omega-3, omega-6 gene variant. Can
Hmm.
you tell us what is the variant and explain what we might learn from it? So omega 3s, right? There's the more the DHA and EPA kind, right? And then there's the ALA kind. We're able to absorb the DHA and EPA better through like fatty fish and salmon and sardines and things like that. ALA is still important, but that's usually like the plant form. Sometimes it's in other sources, but it's a lot harder for our bodies to convert the ELA into EPA and DHA based on this enzyme. Is the gene variant testing that enzyme, or what is that gene variant testing in our ability to process omega 3s or omega 6s?
Yeah. So the FADS is involved in the desaturation of the fatty acids. Um, when you start off with the plant-based ALA, to convert that to the EPA and DHA, you have to make it longer, the fatty acid chain longer and less saturated. So that's why we have elongases and desaturases, and these are enzymes that convert the ALA to these EPA and DHA that are naturally rich in fish and fatty fish. So if you're consuming fatty fish, you already get them pre-formed. But for those who are not consuming a lot of fish and they're consuming plant-based sources like from flaxseed and canola and other oils, they still need to convert the ALA to these long-chain fatty acids. Some people are less efficient. And so one of the genes that we look at is involved in that conversion, and some people just are less efficient at doing it. So they either need to, flood the system with more of the precursor, more of the ALA, or just be mindful of consuming more of the preformed, whether it's through consumption of fatty fish or whether it's through a fish oil supplement. And so that, of course, has implications for largely heart health, but also brain health, and probably a lot of other conditions as well. There's been some trials looking at, some of these long chain fatty acids for inflammation and arthritis and other kinds of conditions. So that is also included in our report.
Yeah, that is very helpful. because I think a lot of people don't understand that. And they're like, I'm getting enough canola oil or walnut oil or flaxseed. And they don't understand we really need the DHA and the EPA, and our ability to convert that is not as good. And so getting it through those sources is really important. Awesome. Thank you for explaining that. And again, thank you so much for your work, for your expertise, and honestly, your time today. You've spent so much time with us. I just want to thank you for that. And anything else to share?
No, it's been fun. Always love chatting about this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Wellness That Fits podcast. I hope you walk away with simple, doable steps you can put into practice right away. If you love this episode, it would mean the world if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another busy mom who could use some encouragement. Until next time, friends, keep creating wellness that fits your life.